By the time Elena Brooks carried the third sack of purple wheat into the Kansas State grain auction, half the room had already decided she was crazy. The grain inside did not look like anything the buyers were used to seeing. Instead of the usual pale gold, the kernels were dark violet, almost black around the edges. Under the overhead lights, they gave off a strange purple shine. One buyer leaned over for a closer look, then pulled back like the grain might stain his hands. Another laughed. Within seconds, the laughter spread across the auction floor. Harland Voss stood near the front of the room with both hands resting on his silver belt buckle. He owned Prairie Crown Elevators, the largest grain storage company in 3 counties. Most farmers in western Kansas could not sell a bushel without going through one of his facilities. Harland walked over to Elena's table, reached into an open sack, and let a handful of the purple kernels run through his fingers. "Looks diseased," he said. Elena did not move. "It isn't." Harland picked up a kernel and crushed it between his thumb and forefinger. "Fungus, mold, bad breeding. Take your pick." It passed the first lab screening. "First screening," Harland repeated loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's what people say when the final answer is no." A few men laughed again. Then Harland grabbed the top of the sack and tipped it over. Purple wheat spilled across the concrete floor. The sound was soft, almost like rain. Elena stared down as months of work rolled beneath muddy boots. Harland looked toward the auction manager. "This shouldn't be in a food-grade facility. Put it in the disposal bin before it contaminates something we can actually sell." Elena stepped between the workers and the grain. "You touch one more bag, and I'll have every camera in this room record it." Harland smiled. "Record what? A broke farmer protecting livestock feed?" Then he pulled a dollar bill from his wallet and placed it on the table. "I'll buy the whole lot for $1. Saves you the disposal fee." The room erupted. Phones came out. Some people filmed Elena, others filmed the wheat scattered across the floor. No one noticed the 3 strangers entering through the side doors. They wore dark jackets with the logo of North Star Foods stitched near the collar. One of them held a thick folder. Another carried a sealed sample case. The woman in front did not look at Harland. She looked at Elena. "Before anyone destroys this grain," she said, "we need one question answered." The room slowly went quiet. "Who owns the breeding rights to this wheat?" 10 months earlier, Elena had been sitting at her kitchen table with a bank letter in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other. Outside, the wind pushed dry soil across the yard in thin brown sheets. It had not rained enough in weeks. The winter wheat in the north field was already shorter than it should have been. Her father, Daniel, sat across from her. A stroke had left the right side of his body weak. He could still walk with a cane, but he could no longer climb into a tractor or spend 12 hours repairing a combine in the heat. The farm had been his life. Now it was Elena's responsibility. "What does it say?" he asked. She folded the letter before he could see the red notice at the top. "Nothing we didn't know." "That bad?" "The equipment loan is due in September." Daniel looked toward the window. "And the operating note? They'll renew it if we show a buyer contract." They both knew what that meant. Nearly every serious grain buyer in the area used Prairie Crown's elevators, dryers, rail access, or storage contracts, and Prairie Crown belonged to Harland Voss. Daniel tapped his finger against the table. "He came by yesterday." Elena looked up. "What did he want?" "To help." She almost laughed. Harland's version of helping usually involved buying something for half of what it was worth. Daniel nodded toward a white envelope on the counter. Inside was an offer for the Brooks farm. The price was low enough to be insulting, but high enough to clear most of the debt. Harland had even included a note saying Daniel could remain in the farmhouse for 6 months after the sale. Elena read the offer twice, then she tore it in half. Her father watched her without speaking. "He knows we're trapped," she said. "He knows we're tired." "I'm not tired enough." That afternoon, Elena walked to the oldest shed on the property. The roof leaked near the west wall. The doors never closed evenly. In winter, cold air came through every gap in the boards. At the back of the shed stood a row of metal cabinets filled with labeled jars, paper envelopes, notebooks, and small sealed bags of seed. Most people who visited the farm thought the collection belonged to Daniel. It did not. The first purple kernels had come from Elena's grandmother, Ruth, who had saved them after finding a few unusually dark heads in a field more than 30 years earlier. Ruth had never called it a new variety. She simply liked the color and kept planting a small patch near the house. When Elena was 22, she noticed something else. During a dry year, several of those purple plants stayed upright after the surrounding wheat had curled and turned pale. She saved the strongest heads. The next year, she planted them separately. Then she did it again. For 11 growing seasons, Elena selected plants for color, stand strength, protein content, drought response, and yield. She recorded rainfall, soil temperature, planting depth, test weight, disease pressure, and harvest dates. She was not a university researcher. She was a farmer who could not stop asking why certain plants survived while others failed. That spring, she planted 60 acres of the most stable generation yet. Daniel called it Violet Plains. The neighbors called it Elena's science project. Some were curious, most were not. "What mill is going to buy purple flour?" one man asked her at the feed store. "People want bread to look like bread," another said. Harland Voss heard every joke. 3 weeks after Elena tore up his offer, he drove onto the farm in a spotless black pickup. He found her checking irrigation lines along the south field. "I hear you're putting more acres into the purple stuff," he said. "That's right." "Seems risky when you need a buyer." "I'll find one." Harlan removed his sunglasses. "Prairie Crown won't take it." Elena stopped walking. "You haven't even tested it. Doesn't fit our grading system. It's hard red winter wheat. It's purple. That's color, not class." Harlan smiled like she had just proved his point. "Customers don't pay us to explain strange grain. They pay us to deliver consistency." Elena looked back at the dark rows moving in the wind. "What do you really want?" "I want to keep you from making this harder than it needs to be." "You want the land. I want a clean transaction." "You offered less than market value." "I offered what the farm is worth without a reliable crop contract." 2 days later, Prairie Crown sent Elena a formal notice. Its elevators would not accept Violet Plains due to the risk of varietal contamination and possible fungal discoloration. By the end of the week, 3 independent buyers had also turned her down. One apologized. The other 2 never returned her calls. Then the bank asked her to come in. The loan officer, Melissa Grant, had known Elena since high school. She spoke gently, which somehow made the meeting worse. "We need a signed purchase agreement within 45 days, Melissa said. "Without one, the bank can't justify renewing the operating note." "The crop is healthy." "I'm not saying it isn't." "Then send someone to the field." "The issue isn't the field, it's the market." "There is no market because Harland is blocking every door." Melissa lowered her voice. "Then find a door he doesn't control." Elena left with no idea where that door might be. A week later, she borrowed a small stone mill from a bakery in the next county and ground 50 pounds of Violet Plains into flour. The flour came out light lavender. When mixed with water, it turned deeper purple. Her first loaf looked unusual, but it smelled warm and nutty. The crust was dark brown. The inside was soft, with a faint violet color that grew richer near the edges. Daniel ate 2 slices without butter. "That's good bread," he said. Elena began selling small bags of flour at a Saturday farmer's market. Most people stopped because of the color. Few bought. One woman asked whether it was safe for children. A teenager filmed the display and posted a video with the caption, "Kansas farmer invents goth bread." The video spread faster than Elena expected. By the next weekend, strangers were coming to the market just to take pictures. Harlan showed up shortly before noon. He picked up a bag and read the label aloud. Violet Plains, grown and milled by Brooks Family Farm. He paid cash. For one brief moment, Elena wondered whether he had changed his mind. Then Harlan walked to a trash can, opened the bag, and emptied the flour inside. A cloud of purple dust rose into the air. That, he said, is the only market for it. Someone laughed. Elena said nothing. She took the receipt from the cash box, folded it, and placed it in the pocket of her jeans. An hour later, a woman named Nora Ellis bought 2 bags. Nora owned a small bakery in Wichita. She had driven nearly 3 hours after seeing the video. Unlike everyone else, she did not ask why the flour was purple. She asked about protein percentage, moisture, and milling performance. Elena answered as best she could. A week later, Nora called. The bread held its color, she said, even after baking. Is that unusual? For natural grain color, very. Nora had already mailed a sample to Dr. Rachel Kim at the Kansas Center for Grain Science. Elena expected nothing to come from it. Then Rachel called. I need to know how this wheat was developed, she said. Elena drove to the university with 3 seed samples and all 11 years of notebooks packed into a plastic storage bin. Rachel was younger than Elena expected, direct and impatient with vague answers. She began by asking whether any commercial seed company had supplied the original genetics. No. Any licensing agreement? No. Any university breeding program? No. Any genetically modified material? Not that I know of. Rachel looked over the notebooks. You recorded all of this yourself? Every season. Rachel opened one at random. The page showed planting dates, soil moisture, rainfall, kernel color scores, and yield results from 5 separate test plots. She opened another, then another. After 20 minutes, Rachel stopped asking questions. The early testing took several weeks. The purple color came mainly from natural pigments concentrated in the outer layers of the kernel. The grain also showed promising protein levels and strong baking performance. But what interested Rachel most was the field data. During drought years, Violet Plains had produced more usable grain than several conventional varieties grown in nearby plots. It was not magic, it was not indestructible, but it had a combination of traits that food companies and dryland farmers could both care about. Rachel ordered more testing. She also warned Elena not to send seed to anyone without a signed agreement. Why? Because the moment people understand what this might be worth, the conversation changes. It changed faster than either of them expected. Harlan returned to the farm with a new offer. $75,000 for all existing seed, all harvested grain, and every breeding record connected to Violet Plains. Elena read the contract on the porch. The agreement gave Prairie Crown full control of the variety. Her name appeared only once, in the section identifying the seller. You called it contaminated, she said. Harlan leaned against the railing. I called it unmarketable. You said it looked diseased. I was protecting my facilities. What changed? A buyer asked a question. What buyer? Harlan smiled. The kind you need. Elena handed the contract back. No. You owe the bank more than this. No. You could lose the farm. Then I'll lose it without giving you the seed. Harlan's expression hardened. You're confusing pride with ownership. No. I know exactly what ownership is. 3 nights later, someone broke into the old seed shed. Nothing obvious was damaged. The expensive tools were still there. So was the fuel card Elena kept above the workbench. But 6 seal sample bags were missing. They all came from earlier generations of Violet Plains. Elena called the sheriff. The deputy photographed scratches near the lock and wrote down the missing lot numbers. He did not sound hopeful. A week later, Rachel found a public filing submitted by a new company called High Prairie Genetics. The company claimed it had developed a drought-tolerant purple wheat variety named Royal Crest. The listed parent company traced back to Prairie Crown. Harland had not just tried to buy Elena's wheat, he was trying to register his own version of it. Before Elena could respond, a state inspector arrived at the farm. A complaint alleged that she had sold an unregistered seed variety and introduced potentially contaminated grain into the human food chain. The inspector placed a temporary hold on the remaining crop. Elena could harvest it. She could store it, but she could not move, process, or sell it until the investigation was complete. The bank's deadline was 3 weeks away. The wheat was ready. And every day it sat in the field, the risk of wind, hail, or early rain increased. Harland called that evening. "This is getting ugly," he said. "You would know. I can still make it go away." "For the farm?" "For everything. The land, the grain, the seed, the debt." Elena looked through the kitchen window at her father walking slowly along the edge of the field with his cane. "You stole from me. That's a serious accusation. You filed for rights to a variety you didn't create. Can you prove that?" Elena said nothing. Harland's voice softened. "That's what I thought." Rachel believed they could prove it, but they needed time. The stolen samples came from older generations. If High Prairie had used them in its filing, their genetic profile should differ from Elena's current seed. Rachel compared archive material from Elena's collection with samples listed in the filing. At first, the results were unclear. Then one detail stood out. Royal Crest carried an instability Elena had recorded 7 years earlier. Under heat stress, the color broke unevenly across the kernels. Elena had rejected that generation. Her notebook showed exactly when, where, and why. The company claiming to have created a new variety had registered a discarded version of hers. Still, proving genetic connection was not the same as proving Harland knowingly took it. Then Daniel remembered the farmer's market. "The receipt," he said. Elena found it inside a coffee tin where she kept market records. It showed that Harland Voss had purchased a bag of Violet Plains flour weeks before High Prairie Genetics filed its application. The label, product name, farm name, and date were all printed on the receipt. Harland could no longer claim he had never heard of Elena's variety. But the final comparison would not be ready before the Kansas State grain auction. The auction was Elena's last realistic chance to attract a buyer before the bank acted. Harland made sure Violet Plains was placed in the experimental category outside the normal food-grade auction. By the time Elena arrived, people were already whispering. Some had heard about the investigation. Others had heard that the bank was preparing to foreclose. Harland made sure they heard the rest. He stood in front of Elena's table, called her wheat diseased, and dumped one sack onto the floor. Then he offered $1 for the entire lot. And that was when the North Star Foods team entered the room. The woman in front introduced herself as Claire Bennett, Vice President of Product Development. "We have been evaluating Violet Plains for 6 weeks," she said. Harland stepped forward. "You mean Royal Crest?" Claire finally looked at him. "No, we do not." The auction floor went silent. Rachel came through the side entrance carrying a sealed report. She had driven directly from the university lab. "The final test is complete," she said. She placed the report on the table. "The grain is free of fungal contamination. It meets food safety standards. Its color is naturally occurring. And the samples submitted by High Prairie Genetics match an earlier, unstable generation from Elena Brooks's breeding collection." Harland shook his head. "That proves nothing about ownership." Rachel opened Elena's oldest notebook. "These records document the trait across 11 growing seasons." Claire added a second folder. "And this proves your company knew the variety belonged to Brooks Family Farm before filing its application." She held up the farmer's market receipt. Harlan's face changed, only slightly, but everyone saw it. Claire turned to Elena. North Star Foods is prepared to offer a 10-year commercial partnership valued at up to $24 million. No one laughed this time. The package included licensing payments, production guarantees, research funding, and the construction of a specialty milling facility in Kansas. Harland recovered quickly. "You can offer whatever you want," he said. "The grain still has to move. Prairie Crown controls the storage, the dryers, and the rail contracts in this region." Claire closed the folder. "We signed an agreement yesterday with Plains Central Rail and an independent mill outside Garden City." Harland stared at her. "We won't need your facilities." In one sentence, the system Harland had spent 20 years building stopped being a threat. A state agriculture official lifted the hold on Elena's crop later that afternoon. High Prairie's application was suspended pending an ownership investigation. The bank agreed to delay foreclosure discussions. Farmers who had avoided Elena all summer suddenly came over to shake her hand. She accepted their congratulations, but she did not pretend to forget where they had been standing an hour earlier. Harland made one final offer. Prairie Crown could serve as exclusive distributor. Elena looked at the purple grain still scattered across the floor. "No," she said. "You already showed me what you do with things you don't control." A week later, Elena sat in a glass conference room at North Star's headquarters. The first contract still carried the $24 million headline, but buried deep in the agreement was a permanent transfer of ownership. North Star would control Violet Plains forever. Elena would receive money, but the seed would no longer belong to her. Claire explained that full acquisition was standard. Elena closed the contract. "My grandmother saved the first kernels. My father kept this farm alive. I spent 11 years developing the line. I'm not selling all of that so my name can disappear from the bag." She stood and picked up her folder. Claire asked her to wait. Elena did not. She reached the door before North Star's chief executive stopped the meeting. "Rewrite it," he told the legal team. The final agreement gave North Star a 10-year license. Elena kept full ownership of Violet Plains. She retained authority over breeding standards, seed multiplication, and approved growers. Participating farmers received a guaranteed minimum price. North Star could sell products made from the wheat, but it could not patent the underlying genetic line or prevent Elena from licensing it elsewhere after the agreement ended. The milling facility would be built near the farming communities that produced the grain. Elena signed that version. 1 year later, purple wheat stretched across more than 4,000 acres of western Kansas. The first harvest supplied flour for breads, breakfast cereals, pasta, and snack products. Elena used part of her earnings to pay off the farm's debt. She used another part to create Purple Plains Growers, a farmer-owned cooperative with open pricing and independent storage contracts. Growers who had once depended entirely on Prairie Crown finally had another place to sell. Harland lost his position on 2 regional boards. High Prairie's filing was canceled. The investigation into the missing samples continued. Elena did not celebrate any of that. She was too busy preparing for the next planting season. One evening, Daniel walked with her to the edge of the field. The setting sun turned the wheat heads almost black, but when the wind moved through them, flashes of violet ran across the field like waves. Daniel leaned on his cane. "Your grandmother would have liked this." Elena smiled. "She would have said, I planted too much." "She would have said that first." Near the office, Elena kept one of the original auction sacks in a glass case. The fabric was torn near the top. Purple dust still marked one corner. Daniel once asked why she kept it. Elena looked through the window at the fields beyond the yard. "Not because he dumped it out," she said. "Then why?" "Because everybody in that room thought they were watching the moment it became worthless." She rested her hand against the glass. They were actually watching the last moment anyone else got to decide what it was worth. Outside, the combines moved slowly through the purple fields. And for the first time since Elena began planting Violet Plains, nobody watching it from the road was laughing.